Hello and welcome to Run Testers. My name's Nick and this is our first look review of the Coros Vertix 2S. So the Coros Vertix 2S is the new top sports watch in Coros's range as a small but significant update on the Coros Vertix 2. Mike, Kieran and I have all been able to test the watch ahead of its launch today to varying extents, so we're calling this an early review and we'll have a full review coming down the line. We've all had a chance to test it to our heart's content and drain the battery at least once, which is a pretty tricky thing to do with this watch. Got the same price as the Coros Vertix 2, £599, $699. Key updates here are a new optical heart rate sensor, which should improve the accuracy of that, although it does reduce the battery life a little compared to the Coros Vertix 2, and a redesigned antennae for the GPS, so the dual band GPS tracking should be more accurate than it was on the Coros Vertix 2. There are three colours of the watch, grey, blue and black. It is a little bit thicker than the Vertix 2S with a 50mm case. The watch itself weighs 61 grams and you get a choice of a nylon or a silicone band in the case. They're both 26mm bands, easy to replace with third-party options if you want to. With the Coros Vertix 2 you just got the silicone band. You've got a titanium bezel and case back on the watch with plastic in between and a sapphire glass screen. So it's really high level of materials here, which is basically how the Coros Vertix 2S offers value compared to other brands, because you are getting basically the best materials here at a slightly lower price than you'll get for equivalent materials in something like the Garmin Fenix range. You've got a 1.4-inch memory and pixel touchscreen on the watch and Coros's usual 3-button layout with 2 buttons and a third in the middle that is also a digital dial. The waterproof rating is 10 ATM. Like I say, you've got the improved dual band GPS tracking on here, things like a compass, an altimeter. You can connect to external sensors via Bluetooth, but not ANT+. And the battery life is still very long on this watch, despite the fact it's been reduced slightly from the Coros Vertix 2. You've got up to 46 days in watch mode, although that comes down to 36 days if you're using the sleep tracking, up to 118 hours of GPS tracking, and 43 hours of dual band GPS.
So for my first run testing, I've actually done more than half a dozen runs with the Coros Vertix S2. I've tested the GPS and heart rate up against the Polar Grit X2 Pro, the Vantage V3 and the Forerunner 965, with the Polar H10 thrown in there for the HR benchmarking. Now before we get into the nitty gritty of accuracy and battery life, a quick word on the design. Now a lot of people might think the S here means you're going to get a smaller Vertix. I certainly did when I first heard about it, but that is not the case. This is still a big hunking great chunky beast of a watch. In fact, the case is thicker than the Vertix 2, although it's virtually the same way. I clocked about 1 gram difference to my Vertix 2. Though the Vertix S2 is lighter than many rivals, you're still strapping on a chunk of a watch here, and it's not going to be for people who like something more compact on their wrist. It's roughly in the Garmin Enduro kind of Fenix ballpark when it comes to overall heft. Now, one thing I really do like is the quick release swappable bands. Those are great. I'm a big fan of the fact that Coros puts 2 straps into the box. You've got a silicone and a nylon strap. I suffer a lot from watch strap silicone burn, so the nylon strap is a godsend for me. I also find the nylon straps much easier to get a good fit, and I find them particularly sort of easier to adjust on the move. I don't forget that I've tightened them and get that thing where you kind of cut off your circulation. Now, as with the Vertix 2, I found the screen real estate great for showcasing, a good range of stats here. It's understandably not as bright as the newer AMOLED displays that you're going to find on some of the latest Garmin's and stuff, but I found it perfectly legible in all my testing conditions so far. And that less punchy screen is one of the reasons you're going to get a comparatively big battery life here up against the rivals. The only time I found that annoying was when I was trying to film this to put it on the video. It's quite hard to capture it in sunlight. Now, I'd also like more control over the backlight timeout and the overall brightness. I'd like to be able to switch that up and down. The touchscreen response for me was okay. It's not the snappiest to swipe and tap through, but it's fine. Beyond that, I think this is a nicely built watch. I really like the blue metallic finish that I've got here. Setup and syncing was really easy. It's reliable with the app, transferring the data after runs. I find some of the Evo Lab insights overcomplicated. For example, my intensity trend is currently resuming, whatever that means. There's a lot of different readouts and data in the app, some of which seems to overlap, and I find it a little bit confusing. Now onto the nuts and bolts, starting with heart rate, and in my test so far, that new optical sensor that you've got here has been okay, but not without some struggles. On slower, steady runs, it often matched the chest strap quite closely for large parts of the run, but there are moments where you get occasional spikes, and on one run I had a moment where everything really went quite wild at the end, while during another 1 mile easy effort, the Vertix S2 optical was all over the shop compared to the H10. So there's periods of much higher BPMs in there and had failure to sort of catch the drops. So early tests on new optical sensors for me have been mixed, to say the least. It can happen when you've got the bigger watches. Optical sensors maybe struggle if the watch is moving around a little bit more. When it comes to GPS, I've done a bunch of tests in the standard GPS mode up against the Polar Grit X2 Pro and the Garmin Forerunner 965 in dual frequency mode. On the overall distances, the Vertix S2 has tended to read marginally longer on average than the Garmin. And when you dig into the tracks on standard GPS mode, it's a bit of a mixed bag. It didn't do brilliantly at sticking me to the roads in towns, but it performed much better in the open country. I also did some tests of the highest actually dual frequency, and the Coros Vertix S2 struggled a bit here too. You can see here that it has me on the wrong side of the road, and in one section, while it pins me to the road nicely on the way out, it struggles on the way back. Again, we'll dig deeper into that for the full review. Then when it comes to battery life, although the overall numbers have dropped quite significantly on paper versus the Vertix 2, the S2 still has impressive staying power on paper. That's better on paper at least than all the main rivals like the Fenix 7, the Enduro 2, the Grit X2 Pro and the Sunto Vertical. I still need to do more testing to see if that pans out in the real world, but here are the headlines from my initial tests. So far I've done close to 8 hours running over 8 days, and the watch is still on 80%. The average overnight battery drop has been around 1% with sleep and stress tracking on. That's lower than the rivals like the Grit X2 Pro and the Fenix 7. On the run, in dual frequency mode, a 1 hour run burned 2%. A 2 hour run in standard GPS mode burned just 1%. A 3 hour run in standard GPS mode burned just 2%. That is a pretty strong performance on battery so far.
So I've used the Coros Vertix 2S for around 10 days ahead of the launch embargo. In that time I also had the London Marathon where I was using other watches, but I did use it for the last kind of week and a half of my training ahead of the race. So I've done 8 runs in that time, and generally I'll be comparing it to a Garmin Epix Pro connected to a Polar H10 chest strap to look at the heart rate. I have seen a notable improvement in the GPS accuracy of the Vertix 2S compared to the Vertix 2. Vertix 2 was the first dual band watch I tested, and I was very excited by their upgrade in accuracy, and it was pretty good accuracy on that watch. But since then we've seen dual band watches from Garmin and Sunto in particular that have been certainly more accurate than the Coros Vertix 2. Coros also had the Apex 2 Pro watches that weren't very accurate with dual band GPS, but I think it now has figured it out. The Coros Pace 3 was a very accurate watch with dual band GPS, and the Vertix 2S has been very much comparable to the Garmin Epix Pro throughout my testing, so I do think you're getting a very accurate dual band watch here. The picture is not so rosy with the heart rate sensor. Like, I haven't really seen any improvement in the tracking here, and pretty much all my runs it's been inaccurate, generally reading too high in compared to a chest strap, like to the point where it was really quite a long way out of whack. So if I was using that to guide my training runs or using the training analysis on the watch, it wouldn't have been worthwhile because the heart rate was so inaccurate. That's a problem with all sports watches, particularly big ones on thin wrists like mine, I would say. But Coros did put in a new sensor, and that has resulted in a loss of battery life, and I don't think you're getting a corresponding improvement in heart rate accuracy. You've just lost a bit of battery life for another pretty inaccurate heart rate sensor here. So obviously we'll continue to test this ahead of the full review, but in all 8 runs I've done with the watch, I've seen inaccurate heart rate data from the watch, so I'm not that hopeful on the heart rate front. Design is fine. It's very much similar to the Coros Vertix 2. It's a big watch. It's comparable in size and feel to the Garmin Epix Pro. Don't love it when I'm sleeping, but I have been able to sleep with it every night without it annoying me too much. Screen is slightly dull. I think we get this with all Coros watches. I think that's one of the reasons the battery life is so good. It's not the brightest screen. Like, it's fine when you're outside, and that's probably the most important thing when you're tracking sports. But if you are indoors, I think I generally have to use the backlight to make it clearly visible throughout the day. Battery life will probably cover more in our full review because it is such a long-lasting watch. We haven't been able to go through a full cycle yet. So after 10 days, I was down to about 60%. Like I said, I was in the final stage of marathon training then, so I did 8 runs in that time, but they weren't that long. And really, with Coros watches and the Vertix 2S, it's the activities that drain the battery life. So in between workouts, you don't really lose much battery life at all because it only takes heart rate readings every 10 seconds by default and that kind of thing. And the screen's not the brightest, like I say. So battery life will pretty much be in line with the numbers you see on the GPS battery life. And it's certainly going to be a very long lasting watch, up against things like the Enduro 2 or the Sunto Vertical. The maps are good on the watch. Obviously tested these before. It's odd that you can't add them as a default data screen to activity, but you can get maps into any activity. I set the hotkey up, so if I hold a button, the maps come up, and then you can add them to your data screens, even if you aren't following a route, and then you get a breadcrumb trail on the map of where you've been. They're easy to get onto the watch by downloading. Like, they're not as detailed and colourful as the maps from Garmin and actually others now, but they certainly do the job.
So the Vertix 2S actually landed with me a week out from the London Marathon, so I wasn't planning to do a huge amount of running with this watch, and I'm actually testing 2 other watches on the marathon day itself. So I did manage to squeeze in an hour easy run with the Vertix 2S. I also took out a heart rate monitor chest strap to kind of see how the heart rate monitoring performs. That is one of the big new features from the 2S compared to the 2. I also had the Apple Watch Ultra 2 and the Garmin Forerunner 965, and that was to kind of compare the dual bands or dual frequency performance as Coros refers to it on its watches. What I also did is I also created a route so I could have a look at the kind of mapping support, also the kind of turn-by-turn navigation stuff, which you have to do. We have to create a course to kind of get that turn-by-turn support, and then you can kind of enable it in when you kind of upload a route and kind of start following it and using that for navigation. Now, I'll start with the kind of general feel of the watch. Now, the Vertix 2 is not a small watch, it's a big, bulky watch, but you know, it's in the same vein of things like the Fenix, the Epics. Now, I do think there's the same similar kind of heft to the Vertix 2. What I have noticed, it does feel a little bigger. It definitely is thicker than the Vertix 2, and I do think that is something you notice, and it is a bigger watch, and particularly on my skinny wrist, it does feel a lot bigger, particularly compared to some of the other kind of watches that sit in this category as well. You know, the screen has stayed the same. It's a transfected display. It's quite weird going back to transfected display when you see the kind of AMOLED displays on things like the Epix Pro, the Epix range, but ultimately it's going to give you good viewing angles, it's going to perform well in bright light, and I didn't have any issues really kind of viewing my data on the run that I did with the watch. Now, in terms of that kind of performance, I'll start with the heart rate monitoring performance. Now, obviously it's the same sensor setup used on the Pace 3, which I think is one of the better wrist-based kind of sensors that I've used on a watch. I do feel like I have more of an issue getting good performance out of these bigger watches in general, and what I found with the Vertix 2S is that heart rate monitoring wasn't fantastic for me, unfortunately, on that first run, and it was a pretty easy going run as well. What I found is it definitely felt a little bit higher, maybe 10 BPM kind of, you know, higher than a chest strap. So I think the heart rate monitoring performance, is it better? I'm not sure. As I said, I do find like I have issues with these bigger watches, and I'm not seeing the same performance I saw from the Pace 3 right now off that first run compared to what I've seen on the Vertix 2S so far. So heart rate monitoring, not 100% convinced that the optical sensor has shown a massive improvement on that first run. Then we get to that dual frequency performance, or dual band mode as it's kind of more commonly known. Now, it wasn't fantastic on the Vertix 2, and that's where it first kind of rolled out on a Coros watch. Then it came out onto the Pace 3. I thought it really performed well on the Pace 3, and I'm seeing good performance here from the kind of dual band, dual frequency mode on the Vertix 2S. As I said, I had it out with the Apple Watch Ultra 2, the Garmin Fenix 965, two dual band watches that I think really perform really strongly. And I found that the Coros Vertix 2S, I think, can really kind of feels like it's matching up with those two watches. I say I definitely going to delve in a bit more deeper and run a little bit longer in it. But in terms of that run and where I was running near some kind of taller buildings, near where I kind of live, and there is a little bit more to kind of block that kind of signal, I found that the performance in general was very good and very much in line with what I saw from the Garmin and the Apple watches. And then battery life, not a massive, nothing massively surprising here. Now, it's surprising that the battery numbers in general have dropped off compared to the Vertix 2. But I think it was good, a few percent, maybe 3% for an hour's worth of running with that dual frequency mode on, kind of heart rate monitoring as well too. And Coros has kind of said that heart rate monitor has seen a kind of drop in battery life. It demands more of the battery compared to the Vertix 2. So definitely some good and maybe not so good things on the Vertix 2S. I do think maybe it does feel a little bit more of a hefty watch compared to the Vertix 2, but it is a big kind of outdoor watch. The dual frequency, dual band mode, I think feels improved from the Vertix 2. But I do think the heart rate monitoring, the promise of improved heart rate monitoring, hasn't quite worked out for me just yet. I've not seen that kind of improvement, even that kind of very easy paced hour run that I did with it.
Early verdict here is that the main upgrade here for me is the GPS accuracy, which is very important to me, and I do think it's something Coros needed to do because it was something that the Vertix 2 did lack compared to top watches from other brands. Like, you're now getting really good multiband GPS from not just Garmin but also Suunto, Polar, even the Apple Watch Ultra. These are all more accurate on GPS tracking than the Coros Vertix 2 for me. Now you've got a really good dual band tracking watch. Haven't seen the improvements in heart rate so far at all, which is a shame obviously because we have traded a little bit of battery life, but you're still getting a very long lasting, reliable and hardy sports watch here for sure. That is a good option to have on the market if you really want the best materials like the titanium bezel, the sapphire crystal glass. I think you generally have to pay more for it to get it from other brands, so there is some value there with the Coros. If you are just looking for features though, I think you're certainly going to get a better watch by looking at the Garmin Fenix. You might even be able to find a titanium model in sales for a similar price of the Fenix 7, and yeah, it's just a better watch. You get more features on the Garmin, and then the features that are on both watches are just more polished and better done on the Garmin. Things like music and maps, even the training analysis I think is a little bit better done. There's a few extra things there that you get with Garmin. So I think the Coros Vertix 2S does everything you need. It's a really good sports watch, lasts a long time, but I don't necessarily think there's a big upgrade here from the Vertix 2 unless you're really into GPS like I am, and I'm not sure that it's going to be the best option on the market if you're looking for features. But if you do want that rugged build, it is a very good watch at its price. Or even then, there might be a case looking at the Coros Vertix 2, because if you're not that fussed about GPS like I am, then you're going to get a very similar watch all round there, maybe at a lower price these days, and Coros is pretty good about supporting older watches as well.
So some initial thoughts on the Coros Vertix 2S, which I thought initially was going to be a smaller Vertix, and maybe might be nice to have a smaller Vertix, but it is ultimately an upgrade from the Vertix 2. And I think from that point of view, when you look at it, you look at the price, it is kind of £599, and that is putting it up against things like the Sunto Vertical. It's going to obviously be cheaper than a kind of similarly sized kind of Fenix 7. So you're looking at something like the Fenix 7X. So it's really kind of those watches you're kind of looking at. I think you can kind of factor the Epix Pro in as well, but that obviously has an AMOLED display. It's much more expensive than the Vertix 2S in comparison. Now, in terms of, addressing some of the things with the Vertix 2, I think absolutely, I feel like it has, what I can see has done that, particularly on that kind of dual frequency, dual band mode. It's looking like it's going to see an improvement there. I think the mapping kind of support definitely feels better. Getting the maps onto the watch feel pretty kind of stress-free in general. And I think, the turn-by-turn navigation, which, works when you upload courses and routes, does work relatively well as well. The battery life still seems pretty strong, but obviously it has dropped across the board mostly compared to the Vertix 2 as well. So you kind of, for me, that is a pillar, or what has been a pillar for Coros, that kind of big battery life, and the fact that it's had to drop those battery numbers. That's still good battery numbers, but has to have had to drop those battery numbers because of that heart rate sensor, which ultimately I'm not seeing at the moment. It is going to be an improvement based on the previous watch, and whether that is a feature that I think needed to be improved or whether that was a priority, I'm not 100% convinced. It does feel like a better Vertix 2 in some areas. Is it going to be a instant upgrade for everyone? I'm not sure just yet, but mainly because I just think that in terms of what this watch has been known for, the Coros watches in general, that kind of big battery life, delivering on those kind of core features or core running features, I think that's really what it's best known for. And I think, has it absolutely delivered that, or is it going to deliver that on the Vertix 2S? I definitely think that's up for debate here. And comparing it to those other watches, would I pick it over? I think I would pick it over the Sunto Vertical, which I think, you're looking at this kind of steel version of that, which I think is a really kind of strong watch. Maybe you're getting slightly slicker software on the Coros watch in comparison, but I think in terms of dual band, kind of performance, the battery level, the kind of design, maybe a little bit sleeker as well, but still giving you all that kind of rugged kind of durability side of things. And obviously looking at the similar kind of price in terms of Fenix watches as well. It's definitely, has it done enough to better those options? I'm not 100% convinced just yet. But as I said, it's only one run, plenty more running to do. But I think there's good things, definitely some not so good things here in my time with the Vertix 2S. But what I'm feeling right now is, has it done enough to kind of put it ahead of the kind of Fenix, the Vertical, the Epix as well? I'm not 100% sure just as things stand off that first run.
So my initial thoughts then after those early runs, or when you consider it's a good chunk cheaper than a Fenix 7X, which is kind of like a match for this, on paper the Coros Vertix S2 appears to offer a lot for the price. It's something that Coros tends to do. You've got comprehensive navigation tools, offline music, though no Spotify support, and it's a real faff getting tracks onto your watch. All backed by the Coros EvoLab training tools. They aren't quite as extensive as you might find on Garmin Connect, or I think as simple to understand, but they're still pretty comprehensive. There's a lot there if you really want it. It's a well-built watch with some key upgrades on the original Vertix. It keeps the Fenix-esque build, but comes in lighter than the Garmin. There's a shorter but still very competitive battery life here that has lived up to billing in my early tests. And I think you're likely to be able to get a month of training on a single charge. That's still kind of Enduro 2 levels of staying power, which I absolutely love. So it's good for kind of really lazy chargers like me. But then you get into the performance, and this is where maybe these early tests have shown that it might not be sort of bang on. The dual frequency has been a bit hit and miss, though more testing is needed on that. Tests so far also don't suggest the heart rate, optical at least, is much of a step on from the previous gen. But this is pretty usual for optical heart rate. It's got those similar struggles that appear to be present here. So my very early feeling is that despite the new hardware and the new sensors, the Vertix S2 certainly hasn't jumped out as a clear-cut obvious one to recommend over the original Vertix as an instant upgrade. There's not really much of a headline here, not on performance at least. The design is so similar that you may well be better off just scouting for a deal on the older gen. But again, these are really early tests, and I'm going to hold my sort of final verdict on the Coros Vertix S2 until I've completed a full suite of tests and we've done our full review.
That's our early look at the Coros Vertix 2S. Please do let us know what you think in the comments below. Please like and subscribe, ring the little bell, and we'll see you next time.